Everybody that's tuning in, my name's Tyson Holt. I am a certified mental performance coach and a certified professional coach. And for the last 12 years, I've been helping professional baseball players and professional baseball teams really with developing the mindset and the mental skill set that are fundamental to high performance. And I've been given the opportunity to facilitate this next hour as we talk about the happiness advantage. And I have two goals for this next hour. One is I hope that you walk away knowing why pursuing happiness is really could be at the core of a high performing organization. And then two, I hope that you walk away feeling really confident about one practical strategy that you or your organization could incorporate to pursue it. Before we get started and before I introduce our experts, just to get some quick ideas. I know this is a global meeting. If you could, I want to get two numbers from you. And so we're going to get a gauge of the temperature. One, the temperature of your organization. I want you to give me on a 1 to 10 scale, how would you really, how important would you say that happiness is to your organization? So on a 1 to 10 scale, how important would you say happiness is to your organization? And then two, wherever you are, what's the temperature outside right now? Put that in the chat box.
Celsius and Fahrenheit are both fair game, or
I guess it would be important to say. Yeah, that's really good, great point.
love it. Okay.
10. That's fabulous.
Is 25? I'm assuming that's Celsius. Is 25 hot? Anyone good on the?
It's 75.
Okay. Oh,
Yeah.
beautiful. Sounds like a beautiful day. Hot for the UK. That's what I hear. All right, so here's how this is going to go down. I'm going to introduce our experts. I'll ask the first question, but also I've been coaching in gym shorts for the last decade, so I will rely on the people that are tuning in to really ask the questions that you think that are really relevant to where you are, and I'll do my best to just put them in the chat, and I'll do my best to get to them. And we don't have a lot of people that are actually logged in, so if you've got a good question, just maybe go ahead and go on screen and throw it at us. And so who we have, actually our experts for the hour, we have Ellenit, Elizabeth, and Jessica. Ellenit integrates her background as a business executive and as a leadership and well-being coach to create healthier individuals and workplaces and drive tangible bottom line results, elevating individual and organizational performance. Elizabeth works globally in population health policy, bridging academia, government, and industry approaches to promote sustainable health, well-being, and economic growth across business ecosystems. And Jessica is a professionally certified coach and holistic health practitioner working with high-performing professionals and organizations. And Ellenit, if you could just start us off by just sharing maybe what happiness is through the lens of well-being in the workplace.
Absolutely. First of all, I'm just so excited to see these ratings on our chat. Some really happy people as part of happy organizations, right? I'm going to say organization because that's what we asked for, but it's really great to see. So I'm going to start talking about what happiness is, and usually we start to frame that with what it's not. I think if you asked any of us, most individuals will say, happiness is a really important goal. And the pursuit of happiness is something we all find really, really important as part of our lives. But the challenge is that when we start to really go deep into the questioning, we find that many of us are confused around what happiness actually is and how do we achieve it and achieve it in a lasting way. So a lot of times if we ask people what would make them happy, you'll get answers like, getting that promotion, that relationship, either getting the relationship or getting the relationship right, making more money, there's a lot of circumstances that we believe will give us the level of happiness that we desire. And it's really interesting because, we'll talk about this a little bit more later. Our circumstances, regardless of how good or bad they are, actually are a really, really low percentage determinant in terms of how much of an overall happiness level we can achieve. The other thing that we tend to think happiness is, or related to, is our feelings. We'll say, I'm happy if I feel good. Or, if I feel a certain way, that means I'm happy. And that may be true in that moment. But the challenge with associating happiness with a feeling is that those moments are fleeting. And what we want to go for is sustainable or lasting happiness. So it's not to say that all those other things don't matter. They do. But we want to make sure that we continue to bring our awareness back to the drivers of our overall happiness that will really give us that lasting experience. And so I'll go back to take it all the way around then and say, well, what then is happiness? How do we define it? And so, I'll throw a couple of definitions out there. One school of thought from the WOHASU organization, which is an organization that elevates happiness and well-being levels, aims to elevate happiness and well-being levels across the world, is that happiness is a process which is to be embarked on based on a lens of purpose, and that is cultivated with daily habits that go across various elements of our well-being. So there's a lot in that. There's another definition that we've come across from Arthur Brooks that talks about happiness being equal to the sum of meaning, enjoyment, and satisfaction. And again, we'll talk about those more in a little bit. But I guess in summary, we can define happiness as the way that we behave and think on an ongoing basis in terms of activities that are going to create well-being and success for us, if that makes sense. I'm going to pause there, and I don't know if there's any questions that have come in, but I'm happy to go on. And I do have a bit more that I want to share, but is there any questions so far on what I've said? Or any comment?
I would love, yeah, I'd love to just play back maybe what I heard a little bit. Is it's more than just our external world. And try that again. It's more than our external world, and it's more than these just fleeting and fickle feelings that we have from moment to moment. It's really it's happiness is something that you do more than something that you have like in any moment.
Yep. I love that. And I don't know if I don't have the right formula in my head right now. Maybe one of these other ladies that heard it with me at the WOHASU Summit will remember it. But there was one kind of definition that said, or one view that said, happiness is having what you want, or wanting what you have. Sorry, I said that the other, wanting what you have, right? Which is very similar to what you just said. So instead of focusing so much on the wants, instead of focusing so much on the wants, can we also manage our haves, right? Can we be happy with what we have? And can we find our way to managing those two in the equation? Yeah.
Yeah. And I would love to jump in on this really quickly because I also attended the summit, and I think that was the most simple note I took because it was a simple equation. But to me, what I'm hearing you say, Ellenit, is it's a unique experience for all of us, because what makes up the components of happiness and the drivers in that process for us will be slightly different and adapted. There's some core things like purpose and meaning and other elements which we'll touch on, but what that actually means to us is a little bit different and unique. And I think that's why people struggle with how to define what this is, and struggle also with this idea that we're always pulling and chasing and moving towards something right? And so I love this equation because it brings you back to the present and it gives you something really tangible from a measurable perspective of how much emphasis and energy do I put on what I already have relative to the pursuit of what I'm longing for and reaching for and striving for. So it's a really nice way to be able to take what you're saying, Ellenit, and then those who are listening in, take that for yourself and be able to do that math. And then you can see, where you are on that scale.
Yeah, and what I love about how you've, explained that further, Jessica, is knowing that you are a yogi like I, bringing this back to the present moment, which we know is one of the core principles of yoga and yoga philosophy. It's being in the now and what you can do with what you have in this moment. That is the beginning to anything else that you embark on. And at the end of the day, happiness is a journey. And we say that, a lot of people will say that, but that is one of the truths that we want to share with everyone on this conversation, is that it's about the journey, not the destination. And we all have the opportunity within us to increase our level of happiness at any given point in time, as long as we're mindful about what those things that will truly bring us that incremental lift. And that's where some of these frameworks and practices come in terms of increasing your level of awareness, right? Assessing yourself a bit more against the things that really matter, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then based on that assessment, which, by the way, these happiness scores of 9 and 10 on the right are great, and those are organizational, but on average, in the US, the average score on a scale of 1 to 10, when you ask individuals what their level of happiness is really under 8, right? It's 6.9 to 7 on average. So, and that seems actually pretty high in terms of some of the things that we hear and see happening in our environment. So it starts with that individual assessment of the things that matter, and then using a number of frameworks that are out there to say, all right, what plan can I create that I will hold myself accountable to practice on an ongoing basis? And I define happiness as a practice, not so much a process, but a practice. Really, it sounds simple, but it's just bringing us back to the awareness of what matters most in the moment. Very basic. And go ahead.
No, I don't, go ahead, because I'm going to change the subject a little bit. And before I do, just go ahead and say what.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a final kind of loop back to, we alluded to purpose, and purpose is one of the key components of happiness, because that search for meaning is something that we find consistent across many of the philosophies and frameworks that we look at. So purpose as a main driver, finding that meaning in your life, and then social connections, right? The health of those connections, whether it's one-to-one with the people that matter in your life or as part of your communities, also very, very big contributor to our overall level of happiness. And I know we're going to possibly share some materials later, but I will, some of the things that I've referred to go back to the Wohasu framework and the elements of well-being that we should look at when we look to find sustainable happiness. And happy to share that after, as part of this.
Would you like me to pull that up?
If we have time, we can pull it up. If not, we could just send it in the chat. I think thank you, Elizabeth. There it is. So this is just one of the frameworks and that I was mentioning. So when we talk about happiness, the reason it matters is because it's directly linked to well-being and success. And in order to achieve sustainable happiness, we want to focus on various elements of well-being, as I was mentioning earlier, and practicing experiences, behaviors, and so forth across these. And so mindfulness is key, establishing awareness. We talked about that, a sense of purpose, really, really important, and our social connections. Top three, I think I had already mentioned, community, having that sense of belonging, really, really important. And then something that's foundational is our physical as well as our mental health. Having a really solid foundation for that and fostering habits around that is critical. And then very importantly, career linked to financial as well. So from a foundational perspective, what we do and how that's linked to our purpose, and how much money, what income we have, and how that sets us, what readiness level that gives us in terms of the things that we want to achieve. That's important as well. So when I mentioned assessment earlier, it's a matter of taking a step back and looking at where we think we stand across these elements, understanding where we may want to tweak certain things at this moment, and then putting a plan together around that and holding ourselves accountable to engaging in habits that will improve our well-being and eventual happiness across these areas. So I hope having a visual around that helps.
I'm hearing, I guess, in one sense, like becoming more happy is one about changing your perspective or your mindset, like really looking at how you assess where you are. And then also like there's some things you can do with your striving process, like what kind of goals that you're setting on how you're moving forward. And
Yep.
before we get to the practical strategies on like really how we can become more happy, how we can help others really pursue happiness in better ways, I'd be curious to know just some of your stories. And I think stories are really important to just really drive home the importance of different principles. I'd be curious to know, like, maybe what are some of your aha moments for when you recognize really in your own lives or in your own work why and how happiness was important?
You're asking me first, or you just want anybody to?
Yeah, just for any of you.
Mine's been a journey, so I'll try to make it quick. What I love to tell people that one of the single most important decisions I made in my life that has led me to where I am today, and I didn't think it was a really important decision, was taking a yoga class. And I spoke about yoga earlier, but I'm going to bring it back because as a type A personality and an individual who was in a really highly stressful job, that was the one thing I found that actually allowed me to quiet my mind and bring me back to myself. And so I kept coming back to yoga. Eventually, I became a yoga instructor. And as I started diving further into the philosophy, I found, my way to holistic well-being, right? Looking at the pillars of well-being across our lives. And that led me to understanding how that's linked to happiness. And from a personal journey, I will tell you that it was a journey from moments of stress and dissatisfaction and lack of purpose in my life. And I didn't know that any of those things were happening, to a very big transformation in terms of my career, my experiences, and the way I approach life. And so it is a journey. I tend to have a very high baseline for happiness, which I've now found out we all do have a baseline. But I've learned how to, I guess, link the science to real life.
And through the science and all the practice, you've just been able to raise your baseline. That's really cool.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Any other noteworthy stories you guys want to share?
And I know mine came from Ellenit when you were first talking about what happiness is not. And I know that that sounds like I'm diving into the problem, but I was early on in my career when I knew something wasn't right. I wasn't coming home happy. I was actually quite sad in terms of my fulfillment and what I was doing and who I was with. But I knew that some of my work was driving me towards something that had a higher purpose. So I was trying to sort out what that was in my mind. And what really changed it for me were the relationships that I made alongside my career, meeting other people in the community, and starting to develop social connections that really took me to a different level. So I'll talk about that a little bit later too. But I think the power of relationships and what they can do, they gave me agency to say, this is not right. There needs to be something that has to be changed. And the confidence to do so comes from other people, and of course finding that within too. So my happiness journey is continual. I find moments of joy that I can reflect on. So sometimes I have these past experiences that when I can quiet the mind and reflect, actually bring out the happiness. And so, yeah, a constant pursuit. And I'll talk more about science and measuring it in a little bit.
Just the Wohasu, that's how you say it? Just both stories so far, like I just the awareness, the connection and experience seem to be like just common threads through both of those.
Yeah, and I'll just jump in with a short one. But I think it's relevant because it takes a different angle. So I'll take one from a team experience. So I was working in an organization. This is prior to coaching, prior to any really trained well-being knowledge. I think we all have a lot of intuitive knowledge, but this was before I studied it. What I was noticing is that the importance of a manager and a team, because I moved around every couple of years to try a different project, a different part of the business, try to do different things. And I started to just recognize that I would work the same amount of hours, put in the same amount of effort, but the energy that I was given, either being refueled or not, was different. And I wanted to put my finger on understanding, why do so many factors not change, like the physical organization, the type of work, the rigor, the pressure, all these things. But when I was on this team, it just wasn't working for me. My mood, my energy, how I felt in myself, my outlook. And on this team over here, it was a completely different experience for me. And what that brings me to now, with much more experience and knowledge under my belt, is that energy is recyclable and flowable. Is that a word? Probably not. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that when you have the right conditions for you, which are unique to all of us, I can call it happiness, I can call it well-being, I can call it being aligned with what you're doing, being excited about what you're doing, the purpose behind the work. It hits you differently. And it's like, where did all this energy come from? It's almost like it's made up, right? Because the math doesn't make sense if you just look at the variables, but there's something in there that fuels you to keep going, that makes it fun, that makes it enjoyable, that makes you want to wake up the next day and do it again. And I would call that happiness. And that the factors that did change were the relationships I had, the people, the connection I had to the work that we were all doing together. And so it becomes a very real thing in the context of work. So I think that was probably my biggest aha, that then spurred into a lot of things afterwards.
Maybe this is the nerd in me coming out, but I just the word resonance comes up to mind, of like, when something resonates with you, like when waves are in sync, they amplify one another. And it seems like that's kind of what you're talking about. When you found certain things that resonated with you, like the energy just was amplified.
Spot on. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we heard a phrase. One of the phrases that we heard was, if you follow your energy, you'll find your purpose. And if you find your purpose, you'll find your happiness. So that's very aligned with what we're saying.
Yeah. I know that probably most people are tuning in because they are really totally in sync with where we are. But I know there's also some more pragmatic decision makers, some skeptics. I know maybe Elizabeth, you want to speak to this on maybe how happiness impacts performance. Like, why should we pursue it collectively within organizations?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've seen a recent focus on employee happiness, and most of my research looks at how that connects to productivity. And so the relationship between those two has been researched for decades, but there's been a lot of inconsistent evidence, which leads to some skepticism around the organizational benefits of worker happiness. But I think ultimately that relationship has key implications for how organizations manage their employees and manage their work. So we're seeing a lot on job redesign, on workflow, on different formats of how we work. And so I'd love to share an example of a research study. Maybe Tyson, you can share the screen again, because I think it has some profound impacts on how we understand that there's been a first causal link between well-being and productivity. And this was a research that came out of Oxford. And what they did was they looked at BT, and so this was in 2023, and they measured self-reported happiness based on that 0 to 10 scale, and that was over the week. How happy are you feeling in a week? So they had these weekly surveys, and they found a 12% increase in productivity as measured by weekly sales. Now, what also happened is that worker behaviors changed based on happiness levels. So there was better time management, people were working faster when they were happier, and they were more efficient when at converting calls into sales when they were in a better mood. If you click again, Tyson, there talks about how the scientists also looked at weather. Now, in BT in the UK, as you can imagine, even though there was windows in this facility and all the facilities, that weather actually had an impact on mood, and those compacted to those workers' performance. So the last point on this slide that I wanted to make is that mood is actually a very strong driver of performance. And especially as we've been talking about relationships, human interactions, and when these social and emotional skills play a huge role, it actually impacts productivity. And I think these types of jobs are making up a growing share of the economy, suggesting that the importance of worker happiness is only going to increase. And we see this across different countries too. I'd love to share just a little bit about what the World Happiness came out in 2024. There's several countries that I think it's worth highlighting. For example, Finland, which always ranks top for the 7th year in a row, it's ranked top for happiness, is that it's been noted that the CEOs encourage employee voice, which generates trust. And then they are very transparent about their annual incomes, which helps minimize the gender pay gap. And these are all components that relate to happiness and performance. In the Netherlands, which was ranked 6th, it's home to the highest percentage of hybrid workers. And this embracing of the hybrid work life has enhanced balance without compromising productivity. And its psychological safety is a top focus for Dutch offices. In Norway, which ranked 7th, it was found that they have very psychologically satisfying jobs. So a lot of my research looks at not just as it relates to promotions and advancement, but how that connects to job satisfaction, because that it creates empowerment. It has the trust and autonomy. So psychologically satisfying jobs, it boosts motivation, reduces stress, and increases productivity. And one more country worth noting is Switzerland. They ranked 9th, and it's been noted that they promote collaborative decision-making. So it may take longer to make decisions, but Swiss managers rarely make key decisions alone, and this ensures a more inclusive process. So these types of components really matter at work. I can keep going if you'd like with how we measure it. So
can I just make one comment on what you're just sharing? Yeah, okay. Because it just lights me up how correlated all of those factors you just shared. So I heard trust, transparency, flexibility. I added autonomy to that. Psych safety, inclusive decision-making, inclusive leadership. All of these are also attributes of high-performing teams. So the correlation between what we see in the data around happiness and well-being having an impact on productivity, that's one piece that Elizabeth is taking here. But if you take a step back and say, how is this important in a bigger organization or in a bigger team? This is the secret sauce to high performance. And I know, Tyson, you're into this too, so you've probably heard that before, but there's a lot of overlap here that just really, it's very powerful to see how it can come through and connect.
Amazing.
Yeah, a lot of the science on motivation and the neuroscience on motivation, on how people become passionate about things and really investing in something, like all of it. Yeah.
So we do know that everything can be measured, and this is about managing. So I know that we like to think, okay, can we just be happy and just sit with it? But really, it shows the progress of society. And I think what's fascinating across the world is that because happiness has started to be ranked, it can be embedded into policy. And so when you're, I've just submitted a policy brief to in the UK to potentially the new government that's going to come in, and we think about using well-being as a lens for this. You can keep sharing the screen.
Okay.
Yeah, because I'll show you some work that the ONS, the Office for National Statistics, is doing in the UK, and you can click through if you don't mind. So this is an example of the types of measures that can be implemented, and this particular example is a validated measure that is used very widely, and it is comparable across countries. So these types of questions are important for us understanding societal progress, and ideally, if we're trying to move away from just looking at GDP as a measure of success, which we know is growing more and more at all costs, where we want to move beyond that to measures that really matter to people. Ellenit talked about sustainable happiness when we describe well-being as how we are doing as individuals, as communities, as a nation. We want to know how sustainable this is for the future. Personal well-being, which is sometimes referred to as subjective well-being, is one of the many ways that can be used to assess the progress of a nation. But I think there's something missing, and this has come out of some research from Gallup and the World Economic Forum, in that the experiences of balance and harmony are not strongly related to the commonly used components of subjective well-being. And apologies, I have some swimmers walking by, but they're becoming more important from a universal lens, because these types of measures on the screen here may not translate to Eastern societies, for example. They do tend to sit within Western measurements. But when we think about things like balance and harmony, balance involves a sense of stability and equilibrium in life, while harmony with oneself and with others can involve feelings of integrity and unity. And so we talked a lot about social connections, and that's why we see social support systems as one of the biggest predictors of life satisfaction, especially in older age groups. So I think just to wrap it up and say a few components of how the World Economic Forum sees this, if we want to understand how we progress, why we sometimes fail, and ultimately improve our quality of lives, then the pursuit of happiness may offer the answer. So I'll leave it at that. Happy to answer any questions.
I'd like to leave a gap just for any questions that anyone who's tuned in has.
If there are no questions, or why you're thinking about it, I'd just love to circle back on the harmony aspect of it. So I think balance is important. Sometimes people really focus on, oh, wow, how do I get that balance? Whereas in harmony, you have an interplay of things that are happening. And so when we talk about the elements of well-being, looking at your physical health, your mental health, your social community, purpose, financial, we want to look at those things and the harmony that we have across them.
Yeah.
To see, once again, assess where we are and where we want to go. So I love that.
We see it too in the way that we're trying to harmonize measures. So that the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, their key mission is to harmonize these measures across all components of performance and success and productivity, because then we can really see the more holistic picture. And so it's used in a lot of ways around integrity. And for those of you who have been on the Global Wellness Institute initiative for a while, or have known us, we put out standards around what's important in the workplace to measure, and work-life balance. We decided that balance actually wasn't the right word, that it was more about integrity, because there will be some give and take some days, and if that pushes us over the edge too much, then we're moving away from happiness. So that the integrity of bringing that harmonious component in is actually where we strive, and the pursuit of happiness occurs.
Theoretically, this makes sense to me. I'd love to hear maybe just some practical strategies on, things we can do and how the impact it can make. Like maybe Jessica, and I know you had some really, really good practical strategies that people can use to put happiness in action.
Yeah, I'm happy to. And I think we've set the frame in a very concrete way so far. So I thank my panelists, because it takes that awareness piece that I think Ellenit was really trying to stir up in all of us in the beginning, to say, we need to reflect a little bit. When we know that these are the components, or I think you were using the word drivers and elements, let's take that framework and apply it uniquely to all of us to try to understand, what are those factors for me? And then I think with Elizabeth showing us what we can see in the data, what we maybe know to be true, but we can see it now through measurements, I think is absolutely so powerful for those that work in organizations in particular, who maybe don't emphasize this too much, or maybe we don't have the full buy-in from those decision makers to make it happen. There's so much out there for you to pull from. So I hope that that also inspires you to, make a case and go for it, because we have the data behind us. So now when we talk about the practicalities of things, I want to frame this in being happy at work as an individual, and then how can we make happy teams, happy organizations? So that's kind of the lens I'll take, given that I work with teams all day long. So I get to see the spectrum of happiness, I would call it. So let's start with individuals. So I think once you kind of have an assessment of what are those factors that bring me closer to, or keep me on my path of happiness, that bring me those sensations and feelings of being aligned with a purpose, that give me energy, that light me up, that drive me, that give me passion, and so on. And Ellenit mentioned it earlier, but it's about building habits around those things. And from a coaching lens, pick one small thing you want to see change and build that up to be almost like a muscle you don't even have to think about so hard, and then build onto the next step, right? So when you're starting to chart the path of behavior change and start to weave in habits that bring you back to your happiness, really start small and build from there. And when it comes to being an individual in the context of a team, let's just use us as an example here, and not allowing it to be others' responsibility to make you happy on that team. Everyone in an organization, everyone on a team can be their own chief happiness officer. We're seeing that roll out there, which I think is so cool. That can be a whole nother conversation, but it's the responsibility of all of us to bring that in there. So how can we make that real? You jump into a team, or maybe you're joining a new team, or you're starting a new project with a current team. Take a minute and take a step back and say, let's have a conversation on our team norms. I love this as a practical piece, because I see this in my teams all the time, where you share what are your personal performance indicators? What are your boundaries that you have outside of work? What are the ways that you like to give and receive feedback? How do you communicate? What are some of those, maybe co-location, if you are traveling as a team, what type of model makes sense for you? And you gather as a team of us four, let's say, or us six, looking at the whole screen, right? And we start to share what's important to us, what is valuable to us, how we spend our time. We can come up with a team norms, or you can call it a team agreement, that then you can run with as you continue to work together. I love to see that, not only as a one-time exercise, but as a living, breathing document that maybe you come back to, check in every month, check in every 2 weeks, check in every quarter, whatever makes sense for your team. But that, to me, really, I think can be a powerful practice to lead the way, but then also make it practical for everyone to kind of know the rules of engagement. So I jumped into a concrete example very quickly. Let me take a step back and share why that works and why that makes sense. So when I think of happy teams, there's a couple of components that we just mentioned, right? Around having trust, having high psychological safety, meaning being able to speak up, share your voice, share your opinion without fear of repercussion, feeling included and connected to the team. So having your voice heard, being connected to each other through authentic relationships, and feeling that you have a shared mission, a shared vision, a shared purpose. Flexibility and autonomy, that is incredibly important as well. So being able to, I think that goes really closely with trust, actually, in teams, where you're trusted that you'll do the job you need to do, and that you have the space to be able to showcase your gifts, your skills, your talents. So that may seem like a lot of components to have a high-performing team, but it's absolutely essential to be able to have and function in a job or in an organization where you can thrive without the expense of your happiness and well-being, because we know these two things need to come together. And because that formula is a little bit unique to all of us, it's on us to be able to create the environment here so those elements are in place. And to make it maybe a little bit more like weaving these things together, to kind of talk about 3 pillars. I really like the work of Annie McKee. She has a book called How to Be Happy at Work, which is what we're all after, right? And she talks about it in 3 key pillars that are really aligned to what Ellenit was sharing with us earlier. The first one being purpose. So purpose provides us resiliency when times are hard, when we're dealing with challenging cases, when we have problems to solve, when we're dealing with a challenging client. We have the resiliency to move forward and the energy to move forward. It also provides us with the drive to share our knowledge and our talents, right? And to be able to bring what we have to the table. Purpose can really fuel that for us and honestly bring us joy, right? That we're able to contribute in a way that's useful. So ensuring that the team that you're working with and maybe the organization that you're a part of or leading has a shared sense of purpose that each individual can somehow connect to. I'm not saying it's always a straight line, but maybe it's a dotted line or a little loop or something, but help your team understand how what's important to them is also important to the organization. Before I move into the next two components, let's just see if there are any questions or reactions to that.
I personally would love to know, like, is there a particular framework or assessment that you use to kind of gauge those components of the team?
In my work, we actually do weekly surveys where the whole team fills out where they are on a scale of 0 to 5. And I think most bigger, larger organizations have something like this in place across what my organization deems as our success factors for happiness and well-being. So we actually look at growth mindset. So as are our teams learning? Do they feel that they're developing? Then we look at sustainability. So very practically working hours, workload predictability, 0 to 5. And then we also consider connection and psych safety as the next two. And so we look across those 4 dimensions every single week and allow our teams to reflect. So back to the awareness part, like, where are you in the case of this team on these dimensions? And then where we see, then we over time obviously have a trend of how a team is doing, then leaders can step in and see what interventions we can pull. Coaches like myself can step in to help broaden the awareness, build some connection and find some tangible next steps to make things better. So we really like to use surveys, and I think data can be really powerful when it comes to not only having a current state assessment, but also having that historical lens of what's happening. So I really like that, but would love to hear if others have seen other practices outside of surveys. No.
I've heard of just the surveys. I haven't heard, and I would be very curious to know to what degree that may happen just more on a one-to-one basis. But I think what's really needed for that is some of the things you talked about earlier. So that trust, right? That's key. So the fact that there's actually surveys and that leadership is demonstrating commitment to actually following through, that is huge, because I think that in and of itself lets individuals know, wow, what I think about matters, right? Gives me agency to feel like I can talk about the things the way I feel. And sometimes, and maybe we're not ready. Maybe most organizations aren't ready to have that conversation face to face. I also would be curious to know if anybody knows if others are doing that, but a simple survey that's done on a continuous basis, and it's so simple, but so powerful.
Yeah. And you touched on something that I think those listening should also recognize, that this works when there is challenges on a survey and leaders do something about it. So it's not just about measuring, but then we also need an organization to show they're willing to do something with the data they are receiving for this to be something that teams continue to fill out and continue to fill out honestly. So we do have to have a very strong buy-in from everyone that we're doing this together, because what I have seen in teams where we've had, low energy, low mood, it's just not the same secret sauce that we need to be successful. That's usually because we're not all on the same page. Maybe you have 2 or 3 stewards of happiness and well-being and purpose and getting us all riled up. And then we have maybe a third of the team not so connected. And so we really need this to be a collective effort from top down to allow this to be something that actually helps move the needle. So it's not a perfect framework or a perfect tool, but I think it is leading in terms of what I see in workplaces, because I don't think this is something that everyone does.
And Joanna is plugging aesthetic empathy. It's capitalized. Is that a program, or is Joanna, if you wouldn't mind weighing in real quick on that?
Yes, just a quick reminder that empathy is important. And when you talk about aesthetic empathy, it's not exactly the same as we think about the regular empathy that we are used to hear about. Because in aesthetic empathy, we not just put our shoes in the other people feelings, but also in all of the senses. And it's not related to what feels good for us, but to tune into the other person, understanding that the other person has a different background. So what is their sensations would be different for us. So we don't want to please us. With aesthetic empathy, we want to please the other person, and the other person is totally different. So that's how we step into the shoes of the other person, but with their own glasses on and not ours.
Thank you.
That's great. I
I know
haven't
we're-
heard of that, but it makes sense to me. Sorry, go ahead,
I-
Tyson.
Yeah, I know.
I've
I'm
published-
trying to be mindful of time here as we get. Go ahead, Joanna.
Just to finalize, I need to go also. I have published an article about it on the branding journal. I can share with you afterwards.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, as we get to the end of the hour here, I would love for you guys just to maybe put a bow on this. And a lot has been thrown out, a lot of different ideas, and just so much of the value of pursuing happiness, and on the why, the how, the what. If you could just maybe share from your perspective, one suggestion or one thing that you hope that people take as a takeaway, what would it be?
Tyson, can I just jump in for a moment just with an idea? Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Probably tell by my accent, I'm in Australia and it is 1 a.m. So I do have my dressing gown on because it is winter for us over here.
Love the commitment.
Yeah, well, actually, and that's just one little thing that I'll share, bouncing off a few aspects that have been shared today already, is a small team that I've been working with. And when I say small, there's 100. It's a tech company, and it's an interesting one. And they're just at the very beginning, because they started with defining what happiness meant for themselves, and they came up with, is it 5? Yeah. Mental clarity, so having the mental clarity that they need to be able to perform. So they actually create a lot of the major software that a lot of companies, e-commerce, etc., is driven on. The team is 100. They only have about 30 that come on site each day. But what they were excited about, and they've only just started trialing it, so I'm interested to see how it works for them moving forward, is actually when they come to work, that there is a little iPad there and they've got 5 icons there, and they just tick them out of 5, and it's based on mental clarity, inner calm, and physical energy, enabled, meaning do they feel that they're enabled in whatever sense that means to them. And they'll obviously work through these in more detail, but these are the common factors that they defined, gives them what they feel is happiness for their well-being. And another one was workflow and design. So in other words, they had a lot of issues which they felt impacted their happiness on a daily basis. And they have a lot of families working together in this company. So it wasn't just how they felt at work, but then they were taking those aspects of happiness or lack of back home together as a family. So being able to come up with those 5 areas of happiness for their well-being, it'll be interesting how that moves forward. So I just wanted to share that with you, because at least there are some positive movements in organizations. And being a tech company, you know, they could do that within 2 days. So kudos to them. And I'm interested to check in to see how they're going. So hope that's added some value. I thought it was interesting.
Yeah,
thank you
thanks,
for sharing.
Angela. Yeah, and I can share my first maybe closing point, because it's really related to what's been shared just now, is from an organizational standpoint or a team leadership standpoint, define the elements of what happiness is for you and your team or you and your organization. and then track and measure it. And then maybe one more, commit to it. So if you can have those 4 things in place, I think you're already moving in a direction that will lead you towards a higher baseline than perhaps where you are today.
Thank you so much. And Angela, that last comment really resonated with me, because I think my closing comment is that the impact to our families and our communities is so profound. And that's what we're striving for, right? For a prosperous society. So my closing comment is, don't be afraid to dive in and explore what it means, how it feels, how we can hold each other accountable, and the impact that it can have across our society.
I love that. And I relate to everything that everyone said so far. And I guess just to add, bringing it back down to the individual level, I think Elizabeth alluded to as well, but don't wait to do the things that matter. Do them now, I think is what I would leave as a closing statement, because what we do and the focus that we have on our own well-being and happiness is necessary, not just for ourselves, but for the lives of everybody else that we touch, the ripple effects that we have in our families, in our organizations, and in our communities at large. So as Jessica said, if we want to find just that one thing that matters, focus on that one thing and get started. Thank you all for the participation and being here.
Hey, we ended with more people than we started with, so I call that a success.
Thank you all, and have
you.
a great rest of your week. Appreciate your time and energy.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.